Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Shangomitra Boladikari. I am an assistant professor at the Department of English and Literary Studies at Brainware University. And today I'm going to talk about the evolution of Indian writing in English. So before I begin with the context and the history of Indian writing in English, it is very important for me to contextualize why Indian writing in English is important. It is important because it gives a voice and expression to India's diverse cultures, histories, identities on a global platform. It bridges the gap between Indian experiences, and also it kind of allows the complex themes of colonialism, caste, gender, and tradition to be explored in a widely understood language that is English. This form of writing reclaims and restructures English, which was once a colonial tool, and now it is used as a medium of resistance and self expression. So, in order to trace the factors that influenced the rise of Indian writing in English, we have three major ideas. The first is that the rise of Indian writing in English at the onset can be located historically. Macaulay's Minutes upon Indian Education, which was introduced in the year 1833, it provided uh, the introduction of English as a medium of instruction with the claim that the English tongue would be more useful for the native subjects. While presenting his famous minute, Macaulay also admitted quite candidly that he had not read any of the Sanskrit or the Arabic books, yet he had made a pronouncement, which is a single shelf of a good European library is worth the whole native literature of India and Arabia. Now, all the historical information which has been collected in Sanskrit language is less than what may be found in the paltry abridgments which is used in the preparatory schools of England. This is what Macaulay had stated. So India thus became a testing ground for the launch of English in the classrooms at a time when the English universities were still steeped in Latin and Greek classics. So English, as a result, was introduced in educational institutions, courts, offices, and thus it kind of dislodged the traditional use of Arabic and Sanskrit as a mode of communication as well as documentation. The second thing is the Woods Dispatch. Now, before I speak about the Woods Dispatch, let me talk about Lord William Bentinck's announcement in 1835. He said that the government would favor English language alone henceforth, and he said that the government would move towards a knowledge of English literature and science through the medium of English language alone. And the Woods Dispatch of 1854 proclaimed the establishment of universities at Bombay, Madras, and Calcutta, and thereafter made English language accessible to students, professors, and officials of government offices. There was a very deliberate oppression about language in this scenario. The third factor that influenced the rise of Indian writing in English is the Bengal Renaissance. The Bengal Renaissance sought to modernize Indian society while restoring the cultural values. The Bengal Renaissance is one of the most significant intellectual and cultural movements in India's history. And it is often hailed as the beginning of modernity in the Indian subcontinent. It was a period of social, cultural reforms, cultural revival, and also an awakening among the masses in Bengal. It was not just about restoring traditional values of India and Bengal, but also it was driven by an amalgamation of traditional thought and Western ideas. So this period, which was roughly spanning between 19th century to the early 20th century, transformed Bengal into a major center of reformist thought. And Bengal Renaissance can also be seen as the intellectual forerunner of the Indian Renaissance, which sought to modernize the Indian society while preserving its core traditions. Some of the most important um, important ideas that came through these movements, through this particular movement, was the abolition of sati, women's rights and education, resistance against caste discrimination, and emergence of art and literature. This brings me to the another very important aspect which shaped Indian writing in English is Raja Rao's foreword to Kanthapura. The quality of Indianness is something that Raja Rao brings forward in this particular text. Of course, the novel served as a very important representation of the Indian society, which was by that time ruled by the Gandhian ideology, and the entire village which is represented was functioning under the Gandhian ideology, working towards the freedom movement. But the most important thing that the novel served, that Raja Rao gave, is the foreword to Kanthapura. So the foreword becomes a manifesto for Indian English writing. In the foreword to Kanthapura, Raja Rao is reflecting on the complexities of writing an Indian story in English language. He acknowledges that English is not an Indian language, but he also asserts its necessity as a medium of communication in colonial and post-colonial India. He emphasizes that although Indians speak English, they have to do so. They do so in an Indian way, which is shaped by their own rhythms, own idioms, and cultural sensibilities. And he highlights that when an author is writing an Indian novel in English, he faces the challenges of expressing Indian life, philosophy, oral traditions, because the language is foreign to them. So therefore, what he does in Foreword to Kanthapura, he argues that English must be Indianized. It must be molded to convey the spiritual and the emotional depth of Indian culture. And to achieve this, he uses the Indian narrative technique, the Puranic storytelling method, or the Sthala Purana in Kanthapura. So the foreword becomes a manifesto for the Indian English writing, and Rao does not reject English. Rao is not rejecting English. Rao is rather saying that the telling has not been easy. One has to convey in a language that is not one's own, the spirit that is one's own. One has to convey the various shades and omissions of certain thought movement that looks maltreated in an Indian language. So English language therefore becomes a mode of resistance. The Indian authors started writing in English. They started using English to express the Indian ethos, to express the Indian culture, the Indian values. So he says that we have to reclaim it. We have to assert the possibility of creating a distinctly Indian voice in the language of the colonizer. So his statement that we cannot write like the English, we should not, it encapsulates his vision of a literary idiom which is rooted in Indian experience. And the foreword sets the tone for Kanthapura, and a novel which is deeply embedded in Gandhian ideology and the oral Indian oral tradition. This is something that is so important when we are trying to understand the evolution of Indian writing in English. The next important idea or the segment which we must address when we are talking about the evolution of Indian writing in English is the first Indian novel which is written in English, which is Rajmohan's Wife. Rajmohan's Wife was written in English, and it was Bankim Chandra Chatterjee's novel, which appeared in 1864. Bankim Chandra Chatterjee had faced considerable obstacles when he was depicting the representation or depicting the idea, and the novel was set in Bengal village, and through a very simple domestic story, it highlights the central concern, which is of self-love and renunciation. But the most important thing that that is the focus of the evolution of Indian writing in English is he faced considerable obstacles in embarking upon this journey of writing the first Indian novel in English. So what happens is there was a clash between the social realms depicted within the novels and the linguistic registers which is employed in the narrative. So there was a trouble, there was a conflict in framing the quality of Indianness through the English language. So there was a discordance between culture and language within Rajmohan's Wife, which became very, very evident in the from the outset of the novel. We see certain usage of language, we see certain usage of language, we see certain usage of linguistic registers, and which is absolutely out of context to the representation. So in the inaugural chapter, Bankim Chandra Chatterjee paints a very big, vivid picture of the village landscape. And he depicts the activities of two women, Konok and Matungini, and their interaction, which was when translated into a foreign tongue, it appeared to be stilted. It appeared to be, it lacked spontaneity. And in this instance, the language appears to be manipulated by the novelist in effort to imbue Bengali experiences with English sensibilities. So I would say that because this was the first Indian novel which was written in English in 1864, it kind of lacked the way in which Indianized English can be juxtaposed with the representation of Indian culture and social milieu. So this particular novel could become a very, very important representation, important example of how there is a discordance between culture and language when it comes to writing in English, when it comes for the Indian writers writing in English. This brings me to the Trinity, the Holy Trinity in Indian writing in English, which is Mulk Raj Anand, Raja Rao, and R.K. Narayan. Among the celebrated writers that the 20th century saw, like Rabindranath Tagore, the 20th century also saw the rise of the novelists such as Mulk Raj Anand, Raja Rao, and R.K. Narayan. All these three writers were identified as someone, as the critic William Walsh had said, that it is these writers who defined the area in which Indian novel was to operate. They established its assumptions, they sketched its main themes, and freed the first models of its characters and elaborated its particular logic. Each of them used an easy, natural idiom which was unaffected by the opacity of British inheritance. Their language has been freed of the foggy taste of Britain and transferred wholly new setting of a brutal heat and a brilliant light. So this is something that can take us back to the last example, that Rajmohan's wife was an example where the language was not still free of the taste of Britain, of the taste of the British English language. And these three writers started inventing new methods of writing, new methods of narrative techniques, and they had come out of the entire idea of being stuck within the British English. Mulk Rajanand, R.K. Narayan, and Raja Rao, all these writers have represented the freedom movement, the Quit India movement, the social milieu, and the consciousness of an Indian character in their novels. They have showcased the themes of, they have represented the themes of colonialism, of exploitation, of gender atrocities, and with very simple language and with very simple and language, they were able to represent the socio-political issues, the important socio-political issues at that particular time. Especially Kanthapura. Kanthapura is a story of the South Indian town that is affected by the civil disobedience movement. What is interesting about this book is the narrative technique that is used by Raja Rao. The story is told through the voice of the old woman, who's the inhabitant of the village, whose name was Achaka, and who uses the structure of traditional folk epic, which is the Puranas. And the book kind of fuses the spirit of traditional religious faith of the village with that of the nationalist movements, which is very important, which is a blend of literature as well as history. And I will conclude by saying that Indian writing in English functions as an authentic medium of Indian experience. And later on, of course, Indian writers of the new writing, such as Anita Desai, Khushwant Singh, Manju Kapoor, Anita Nair, Chitra Banerjee, and Amitav Ghosh, they brought rigor of scholarship in novel writing. And these writers have shaped and altogether a new form of writing. That is why it is called new writing. And as one of the critics have said, that Indian English literature needs to prove its credentials by aligning with people at large who make up this country. And I believe that Indian writing in English has been able to do that, because it is no longer an example of elitism. It is no longer an example of a part of English writing, British English writing, but it has evolved as an authentic medium of Indian experience. So thank you so much, everyone.